Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in. Today we are with Adam Rizzo, and we're going to talk about the Philadelphia Museum of Art Union, try to understand it a little bit better, where the fight's at now, where it's going, and maybe how we can support, because I think it could have ripple effects with art institutions around the city. But we'll start with Adam. Adam, introduce yourself. And you are not related to the former mayor, who shall not be named, right?
No, I am not. Thanks, Conrad. I actually I wasn't really aware of Frank Rizzo until I moved to Philly. I moved from New York, so I didn't know all that terrible history until I got here, and everyone started asking me if I was related. And I am not. But my name is Adam. I am a museum educator at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and now the president of our local, since we formed a union at the PMA a year ago last summer.
Yeah, how does a union form? Like, how does it?
It's a really interesting question. I'll try to give you like a succinct answer. It really just started with conversations between staff members. There was a salary transparency spreadsheet that kind of went viral. It must have been at least 2 years ago. Art Museum Transparency got that started, and it basically just asked folks to input their salary, benefits, and position and title and that kind of stuff, and their institution into an Excel spreadsheet that was publicly available. And that was the first time that got people really kind of talking about the lack of equity at museums. And I think it was really eye-opening for folks to see just how little museum professionals were paid at all levels. Well, not all levels, I shouldn't say that. Executive pay is exorbitant. But for the average worker working in cultural institutions, the pay is really pretty abysmal across the board. And that got conversations going. For me personally, it got me talking to folks in my department. And just as an example, one of my colleagues who had worked at the museum for longer than I had actually, she was making a good chunk less than me. And had, in fact, a little more experience than I did. So that got really kind of opened my eyes to like the pay disparities. And the only thing I could think of that would explain that was that she's a woman and I'm male identifying. So that was a real eye opener. And I think those types of conversations really got the ball rolling about like what we can do to change these things. And organizing seemed like a good answer.
Yeah, the internet can be good and bad, right? And these like open wage things seem to be helping workers' rights movements in enormous ways. I think we're gonna have two types of people tuning into this conversation, this quick conversation, people who know a lot about what's going on and people who know nothing. So let's give something to the people who know some stuff that's going on and give us a status update. Where's the union fight right now?
So we've been negotiating with the museum now for almost a year, because we won our election last July, last summer. We won it last summer. COVID times, time has no meaning anymore. It's really hard to keep track of things. But last summer we won our election by a huge landslide, which was really encouraging. And then we began negotiations, and negotiations got off to a slow start because we had to do some unit clarification, which basically means when you're going through an organizing drive and once you've won the election, usually the institution you're organizing with has certain ideas about who should be in the unit, who should not. And those decisions are based on who is actually a supervisor and who is not a supervisor. So supervisors are excluded from the unit. And of course, there were some disagreements about who was actually supervising other workers. So there was a period of months where we were just trying to figure that stuff out before we got into actual proposals for the contract. And we've been working on the contract now for a number of months. There have been slow periods. There have been periods where we've gotten a lot done. We're still not at the economic issues. So that's really the big turning point in our negotiations. And we're hoping to have a contract. I mean, I would love to see a contract happen by the end of the calendar year. That would be my pie in the sky goal, but we'll see if that's actually achievable. I really hope it is. The economic issues are the tough ones to get through, I think, in negotiations.
So let's dive into what is the union fighting for, and why does this take so long? You know, I've never been a part of a union, so I don't know. I've certainly never been a part of creating a union, but there's a couple of union talks happening in the city right now, and I'm kind of confused why sometimes they're taking years. So what are you fighting for, and why is it taking so long?
Those are good questions. So to answer why it's taking so long, I think from what I've learned, and also I'm new to this myself, like I've never been a part of a union before this, and I'm learning a lot through this process. I think, and forgive me, that's my dog in the background if you hear any chains rattling around her neck, but it could just a collar, not chains. I'm not evil. I think I've been learning a lot, and a first contract, from what I understand, usually takes a lot longer than when it comes time to renegotiate a contract further down the line. So you have to get through all of these nitty gritty kind of labor law contract items. It's basically like creating a employee handbook, but coming to an agreement on everything between the union and management, basically. So that can take a really long time. And of course, it can go quicker if you're working with an institution that actually wants to negotiate and wants to devote the time and the energy to doing it in good faith. And there have been moments when the museum has seemed to want to negotiate, and there have been moments where they've seemed to drag their heels. So, and I think that's just the way it is. And you might know that the museum also has been hired Morgan Lewis law firm, which is a notorious anti-union busing law firm, to lead the negotiations and consult on the negotiations. So
that's not a good sign.
Not a good sign, but you know, I'm hopeful that we've kind of reached a point where we'll make some progress. I'm really hopeful.
So what are you fighting for? What were the working conditions before, and what do you want?
That's a good question. There's a lot of things we want. I think the most kind of pressing bread and butter issues for folks are around compensation. I think if you know anything about working in cultural institutions, like you're often told that you work for the love of the work, not for a salary. You're told that there's some sort of cultural capital that you get for working in an institution like that. And so that's why you don't get paid much, and maybe why you agree to work longer hours for less. And the truth of the matter is that you can't eat prestige. So I think that's something that has become even more I think a lot of people weren't aware of just how widespread this issue was within museum institutions until folks started talking, and that's why there's been such a kind of surge in organizing at cultural institutions across the country, and across the city even. I think you can think of cultural institutions, I think, in the same breath as you can think of like academic institutions. Like UArts, for instance. So I think there are a lot of those issues, but also there's no accountability for management ever. We had a number of high profile harassment and abuse instances by managers that went public in the press in January of last year. And, that wasn't why we organized, but it certainly lit a fire under, I think, people's butts to kind of get working. And those type of things, happen, and they're able to happen in environments where there's no accountability, like where there's no recourse for workers, where all they have is HR, and HR answers to the senior management, right? So having a contract means that there's something in writing that you can grieve, right? You can bring it to the National Labor Relations Board and actually have some protection that's legal, right? That's not just relying on senior management to kind of listen to you. And then I think beyond that, there's just so many issues across the field in terms of diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. Our staff and the members of our unit are overwhelmingly white. And that's a huge problem because it does not represent the city of Philadelphia at all. And in our contract proposals, we're trying to push for greater job stability. We're trying to push for workers to make at least $15 an hour. Right now, there are some people at the PMA who make $11.50 an hour. There are people who work full-time jobs and make around $30,000 a year and are working side hustles, right? Like working retail on the side so that they can survive. And that's one of the reasons why there's lacking diversity in institutions like this, right? It's the type of work that only some people are able, can afford to do. There's little things that you don't really think about until it's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe if you don't require a master's degree for an entry-level job, maybe that would make a difference, right? So if you can get that into a contract, that can really change, I think, the face of an institution.
I think I've been following the PMA Union on your Twitter and Instagram, which I encourage anyone to do. So I've been following your work for a while, but the PMA acquired posters for a project that I organized called First 100 Days with 13 local artists here in Philadelphia. And one of those posters was about $15 minimum wage. So it was brought to my attention through your Instagram account. It was one of y'all DM'd me and said, it's interesting. We all love the project. We love the posters. We're glad the PMA acquired them. But it's interesting that one of those posters calls for a $15 minimum wage when, there's not even a $15 minimum wage as a PMA. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like there's there's kind of a misalignment between sometimes the way the museum kind of projects itself outwards to Philadelphia and the way it actually functions internally. So yeah, I mean, it's great that they acquired those works, like we said, but they need to put their money where their mouth is.
Do you think, as sort of an outside person, as a viewer, I'm seeing things like all these big announcements and plans for the redesigns of the PMA, these new galleries opening, there's different news reports about how many millions of dollars this and that's going to cost. So for me, as just an outside person, it's hard to square away why this fight is taking so long, why there's contention, why they're hiring a union busting lawyer to push against y'all when there seems to be so much money and stuff for the other stuff. So much money for the infrastructure, not money for the people who actually fill that infrastructure and make it a place that people want to visit. Is there frustration about that within the union?
I think there is frustration, and it's a really complicated issue. I mean, I'd love to say it was super black and white, but it's really not. It's about priorities, right? So the museum and museums, I think, across the country and the world have embarked on these major building projects that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, right? The work that was done on the museum, I think it's beautiful. There are great new spaces. I love the new contemporary galleries. We need space for work that's not just by, dead white men. The new American galleries are beautifully conceived. All of that's great. But I think it's, like I said, it's a question of priorities. Fundraising is directed towards certain goals. So if the museum is directing their fundraising goals towards a, $500 million building project, once they get that money, it's usually restricted. So it's not like they can direct that money towards salaries if they chose to. So, it's kind of like they raise the money and then the pandemic hits and they lay off 100 people. They couldn't, use any of that money to keep staff on or to hire more people or what have you, legally. But I think it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow for, I think, workers at the museum when every department at the moment is understaffed and we're all working. We lost so many people over the course of the pandemic through layoffs and furloughs, that we're all taking on additional responsibilities that aren't really in our job descriptions, and getting the work done in a larger footprint and with more exhibition space and continuing ahead with these huge projects with just a smaller staff. So it's hard to square those two things, because I think it is about what the museum values. I think it speaks to what maybe not the museum, what senior management values, and what choices they're making.
How many people work at the PMA currently?
Oh gosh, that's a number that I don't know off the top of my head. I couldn't answer. Yeah.
And do you think, am I correct? I just heard news the president is stepping down and there'll be another president. Do you think that'll help this fight?
I hope so. Yeah. So Timothy Rubb announced recently that he's stepping down, retiring, and I guess I'm not surprised, given that he saw the core project through to the core project being the big front gallery kind of renovation of the museum. He saw it through to completion over the summer, and so it makes sense. There has been a kind of a mass exodus at the top in senior management at the museum recently, and I think that might have. I could speculate about the reasons for that. I think most people, if you just read the newspaper articles, can probably speculate as well as why that's happening. Yeah, I'm hopeful that a new director. What I've heard is that they want to bring someone in for sometime. Their goal, I think, is the beginning of the calendar year. So sometime in 2022, and I'm excited at the possibility of having some new ideas and new perspectives filling the top ranks at the museum. But we'll see. I mean, the thing is, you can't. A change in leadership, however great that new leader may be, still doesn't guarantee better working conditions. The only thing that can guarantee better working conditions for workers is a contract, something that's written into law, so to speak.
And why? This is kind of a broad question, but I'm just curious how you might answer it. Why should the average Philadelphian care about your union fight, right? I suspect, as someone who's worked in the arts for Philly for over a decade now, and I've seen time and time again from every organization that's out there, artists aren't paid enough, they're undervalued. So I suspect that there could be ripple effects if the PMA, which is really one of the biggest arts organizations in the whole city, the whole region, sets a new standard, that it could sort of leak into other areas. Is that sort of what you think too? And why do you think, why should the regular Philadelphian care about this fight?
That's I don't know. That's a tough question to answer. I think the average Philadelphian should care about this fight because, I think folks need to, I think folks everywhere deserve to make a living wage. I think that's really the baseline of it. And I think also that there is potential for this to kind of grow and expand, and help other institutions. For instance, the Penn Museum just voted to form a union for their non-professional workers. They won their election, I think, 2 weeks ago, and they'll be joining our local, which is really great. And they faced a really strong anti-union campaign from the University of Pennsylvania, unlike anything we saw at the PMA. So, I think there's potential for this to grow. I think, if institutions are held accountable to the people who work at them, I think there's a chance also for the culture of those institutions to change more largely. And I think the the possibility that the institutions will actually begin serving the Philadelphia community in a more meaningful way. I think there can be. I think there are great possibilities for at least the PMA and hopefully other institutions to kind of begin looking outwards to the city that houses them.
I think the larger fight, I think I support pretty much any union fight. There are certainly unions that are too big. I won't name them, but there's one I can think of in Philly.
Yep.
That has way too much power. But, we're this art city. Every time the New York Times or Time Magazine writes about us, arts are always mentioned at the top. We're known for our arts, right? We're not known for having 2 Comcast buildings. We're known for the arts. And we have to pay the people who make those arts institutions the cultural icons that they are. It's just about basic human rights, right? Like these are just sort of basic needs that we all need to meet.
And I don't, sorry, I was just gonna say, I don't know the exact numbers, but you read the economic reports from, these institutions about the income it brings into the city and just from tourism and what have you, like the kind of the larger economic footprint of the arts institutions. And you're absolutely right. It's a business and it's a business that's quite successful and, they should be morally obligated to pay their workers a living wage. That's the baseline.
And have their staff reflect the diversity of the city and the other things you talked about. How can people support you? I guess follow you on Twitter and Instagram is one way. Public pressure helps. We've seen that in any number of these big fights is when, we get behind the union. So how can people support you?
Follow us on our socials. On Instagram is probably our most active, but Twitter also. Stay tuned. We're going to get into our negotiating economic issues starting, I'm hoping in the fall, so maybe like October. And that's going to be really a hard fight for us because, that's obviously where the museum will want to push back the hardest to save money. We had one day over the summer where we did some informational picketing outside of the museum, talking to visitors about our union fight. We may end up doing that again. And we'd love to see support out there. It was really nice. We had unions from after another union in the city came by and brought us donuts and coffee while we were picketing outside. It was nice to talk to visitors who are supportive and love the museum like we do, but also believe in equity and fair kind of wages and stuff like that. So we may be doing that in the future. We'll keep everyone posted on our socials, and you can always email the museum. That's an easy way to do it. You can just email, go on the museum's website, phillamuseum.org, and then follow the links to get in touch with the museum and shoot them a message saying, we support the union and hope you'll negotiate in good faith.
Working people supporting working people. It's the only way we're going to get ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thank you so much for your time. Is the dog eating dinner? Has the dog been eating dinner this whole time?
I'm chewing on a chew toy in the background, but quite loudly. I apologize.
No worries. It was like then white noise. I didn't mind.
Okay.
Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Connor.